Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The global number of coronavirus cases has crossed 100 million, while the death toll has reached to over 2.15 trillion. The worst-hit country, United States, accounts for over a quarter of the global infections with over 25.4 million cases. India has the world's second highest caseload with over 10.6 million infections, followed by Brazil's more than 8.9 million cases. Pakistan has registered over 1,500 new cases and 74 deaths overnight, with the toll crossing 11,400. In India, police have registered 22 cases against the protesting farmers, accusing them of violence on Republic Day. However, a union leader says government associates instigated the violence to discredit the farmers' movement. Meanwhile, in New York, the Sikh community gathered outside the Indian embassy in solidarity with the protesting farmers. Russia and the United States have struck a deal to extend the New START nuclear arms control treaty. The Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden discussed the issue over a phone call. White House says Biden also raised the issue of Moscow's alleged meddling in the U.S. election and massive cyber espionage campaign. A UN report has found the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels guilty of money laundering and corruption. The annual report to UN Security Council on implementation of sanctions says the malpractice adversely affected access to adequate food supplies. It said the Houthis also collected at least $1.8 billion as state revenue in 2019 to help fund its war. And in cricket, Pakistan have scored 176 for the loss of 6 wickets at tea break in their first innings at the National Stadium in Karachi. The 94-run partnership between Azhar Ali and Fawad Alam broke after Ali was caught behind at 51, while Alam is on the crease with unbeatable half-century. The hosts are now trailing the visitors by just 44 runs. These were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The global number of new coronavirus cases has crossed the 100 million mark, while the death toll exceeds 2.15 million. The worst-hit country, United States, accounts for over a quarter of the global infections with over 25.4 million cases. India has the world's second highest caseload with over 10.6 million infections, followed by Brazil's more than 8.9 million cases. More on the coronavirus in this report.
As the world crossed the 100 million COVID-19 cases, the leaders of even the most developed countries have nothing to offer but half-baked apologies over the mishandling and faltering social-political infrastructures. In Europe, Portugal's government is considering the transfer of COVID-19 patients abroad as oxygen supply system of a large hospital near Lisbon failed from overuse. AstraZeneca's chief executive says the United Kingdom comes first for vaccines as he rejected calls to divert the doses to the European Union. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged the EU to not restrict the vaccine supply. As the United Kingdom's death toll exceeded 100,000 mark, Johnson said he takes full responsibility for what unfolded in Britain's fight against the virus.
As Prime Minister, I take full responsibility for everything that the government has done. What I can tell you is that we truly did everything we could and continue to do everything that we can to minimise loss of life and to minimise suffering in what has been a very, very difficult stage in a very, very difficult crisis for our country, and we will continue to do that, just as every government that is affected by this crisis around the world is continuing to do the same.
Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has apologized for an inadequate medical response to COVID-19 patients due to the country's strained health system. Over in the Americas, tribes leaders in the Amazon rainforest have urged the Brazilian government to ensure vaccine rollouts reach all of its communities. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden says the country's vaccine program is in worse shape than anticipated, as he announced to purchase 200 million more doses.
After review of the current vaccine supply and manufacturing plans, I can announce that we will increase overall weekly vaccination distributions to states, tribes, and territories from 8.6 million doses to a minimum of 10 million doses. Starting next week, that's an increase of 1.4 million doses per week.
Public frustration and anger against COVID-19 restrictions continue to grow across the world as economic strife intensifies. Though Dutch cities witnessed relative calm after 3 days of anti-lockdown riots, over in Lisbon, hundreds of protesters clashed with soldiers as they said nationwide lockdown is increasing their poverty.
Meanwhile, Pakistan's National Command and Operations Centre against the coronavirus has formulated a comprehensive vaccination strategy. In a statement, the NCOC said the strategy includes 8 steps and was formed after consultation with all the provinces and stakeholders. It said Pakistan's National Immunisation Management System will operate through National Vaccine Administration and Coordination Cell. It said the management system is mostly digital with very little human interference. Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded 74 deaths and 1,563 infections in the last 24 hours. The national death toll has reached to 11,450, while the infections have surged to over 537,000. Now, a complete shutdown is being observed in the Kupwara district of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Kashmiris are remembering the victims of a massacre carried out by Indian troops in 1994. On this day in 1994, Indian troops killed 27 civilians to punish the people for observing a shutdown on the Indian Republic Day. All shops and other business establishments are closed with traffic suspended. Meanwhile, Pakistan's government says Prime Minister Imran Khan will address a public rally on Kashmir Solidarity Day on the 5th of February. He will speak in Kotli district near the line of control. Now, in India, police have registered 22 cases against the protesting farmers, accusing them of violence on the Republic Day. However, a union leader says government associates instigated the violence to discredit the farmers' movement. Let's find out more in this report.
3 contentious bills that will change the way India's farmers do business have sparked months of protests across the country. Growers are angry at what they see as laws that help large private buyers at the expense of producers. But the demonstrations have also spilled globally. The Sikh community in New York gathered outside the Indian embassy in solidarity with the protesting farmers.
India is doing this especially in Kashmiri and farmer. They are attacking them, they are killing them, they are innocent.
Around half of India's population works in agriculture. Unrest among the estimated 150 million landowning farmers represents one of the biggest challenges to the authority of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi since he came into power in 2014. The government's offer to delay the farm laws for 18 months has been rejected by the farm leaders, who want a total repeal of the laws.
All the bills are for the farmers, and what we want is to take it back. There's hundreds of thousands of people that are in today's rally that are protesting to get back what we want. We want the MST to drop how it was before. We want the Mandi system to come back as well. And here we are in front of the Indian embassy to have the same thing, what we want from India. We want our rights.
The protesters say they want to challenge India, who has carried out the genocide of Sikhs and enacted farm bills carrying out the genocide of Sikhs.
Well, now moving on, Iran says it's the US who should make the first goodwill move to save the 2015 nuclear deal. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says Iran stood firm against 4 years of U.S. economic terrorism imposed in violation of the deal and UNSC resolution. In a tweet, Zarif said it was the U.S. that broke the deal for no reason. He said Washington must remedy what it did wrong and then Iran will respond. Meanwhile, Israel's Defense Forces chief, Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi, has warned the U.S. return to the deal will be a mistake. Kochavi said strategically the return to JCPOA will presumably lead to regional nuclearization of the Middle East. Now, Russia and the United States have struck a deal to extend the New START nuclear arms control treaty. The Kremlin said President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden discussed the issue over a phone call. In a statement, it said the two leaders expressed satisfaction over the exchange of diplomatic notes between their countries. The Kremlin added the procedures required for the extension of the treaty will be completed in the coming days. Meanwhile, the White House said the two sides agreed to discuss a range of arms control and emerging security issues. It said Biden also raised the issue of Moscow's alleged meddling in U.S. election and a massive cyber espionage campaign. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has reaffirmed his commitment to strengthening transatlantic security. In a statement, the White House said Biden held a telephonic conversation with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. It said the president conveyed his intention to work with allies on Afghanistan, Iraq and Russia. The statement said Biden reaffirmed Washington's commitment to collective defense under the North Atlantic Treaty. It added the president thanks the NATO chief for his steadfast leadership of the alliance. He also emphasized the significance of shared values and consultation to strengthen deterrence and counter emerging threats. Now, a U.S. federal judge has temporarily blocked President Joe Biden's 100-day freeze on migrant deportations. The decision has once again put the future of thousands of immigrants from across the world, especially South America, in limbo.
The Texas judge's temporary restraining order blocks the policy for 14 days nationwide. Earlier, the state of Texas filed a complaint saying it would face irreparable harm if the deportation freeze took effect. The Biden administration is expected to appeal the ruling. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order aimed at promoting racial equality. The order scales back the government's use of private prisons and bolsters anti-discrimination enforcement in the housing market. Talking to reporters, Biden stressed the need to open the promise of America to every American.
I believe this nation and this government need to change their whole approach to the issue of racial equity. Yes, we need criminal justice reform, but that isn't nearly enough. We need to open the promise of America to every American, and that means we need to make the issue of racial equity not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole of government.
Elsewhere, the U.S. State Department said Biden administration will also thoroughly review U.S. sanctions on the International Criminal Court officials.
Now, the U.S. Senate has blocked an attempt to halt former President Donald Trump's impeachment trial. But a conviction now looks unlikely as only 5 Republicans joined the Democrats in rejecting the motion. Republican Senator Rand Paul forced a vote on whether the trial is unconstitutional because Trump is no longer president. Paul presented the point of order after lawmakers were sworn in as jurors for the trial proceedings. The Democratic-led Senate blocked the motion in a 55-45 vote. Talking to Media Kentucky, Senator Paul said votes meant the impeachment trial was dead on arrival. Democrats require the support of 17 Republicans to convict Trump on the charge of incitement of insurrection. Now, a UN report has found the Yemeni government and the Houthi rebels guilty of money laundering and corruption. The annual report to the UN Security Council on implementation of sanctions says the malpractice adversely affected access to food supplies. The report says the Houthis also collected at least $1.8 billion as state revenue in 2019 to help fund its war. It adds Saudi Arabia deposited $2 billion with Yemeni Central Bank in 2018 under a development program. However, it says the bank laundered a substantial part of the deposit in a sophisticated money laundering scheme. The United Nations has recently warned that Yemen is on the verge of a large-scale famine with millions of civilians at risk. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. Pakistan has reaffirmed its commitment to the multilateral cooperation for preserving peace and realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. Speaking at a virtual conference of the UN Secretary General's Peace Building Fund, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan takes pride in its rich UN peacekeeping history. The Foreign Minister announced a token contribution of $25,000 to the Secretary General's Peace Building Fund. He said the pledge underscores Pakistan's long-standing political, human and financial commitment to UN's endeavours in peacekeeping. Later, talking to media in Islamabad, Qureshi rejected any possibility of bilateral trade with India. Cochair of Syria peace talks has warned if concrete results of the dialogue are not obtained in a short time, the process will falter. Speaking at the end of the second day of talks in Geneva, Hadi al-Bahra said participants should not put obstacles in the progress of the dialogue. Without naming anyone, he said the most important feature of the talks is the attitude of all parties to the constitutional process. Al-Bahra said delegates should show willingness for the full implementation of the UN Security Council resolution for the talks to succeed. The 5-day Syrian Constitutional Committee talks are convened by the UN to form the basis principles of the Syrian constitution. Meanwhile, Tunisia's parliament has approved the cabinet reshuffle amid violent protests. Tunisia's Prime Minister Hichem Meshishi named 11 new ministers, saying that he hopes it will inject new blood into his government. He said the young people protesting outside Parliament reminds the administration to keep its priorities straight. The Prime Minister said the protests are legitimate and the government will listen to the angry youth. However, President Kais Saied indicated he would reject the reshuffle. He also condemned the absence of women among the new ministers. Meanwhile, the riot police opened water cannons on protesters outside the Parliament who rallied against social inequality and police abuses. Now moving to Bangladesh, where 2 people have been killed amid the violence in the Chattogram City Corporation election. The police say a pedestrian was killed in a gunfight between supporters of 2 rival candidates. Police say the killed person was a construction worker caught in the middle of the armed confrontation. Another man was killed during an altercation with his brother over the rival groups they supported. Meanwhile, the police said at least 25 others sustained injuries during violence at polling centres. They have also detained one of the candidates while polling has been postponed at 4 centres. Now, Argentina and Chile have called for closer relations between the Latin American nations. Argentine President Alberto Fernandez is visiting Chile to bolster the bilateral ties. Fernandez and his Chilean counterpart, Sebastián Pinera, signed 3 agreements in the areas of health and the border. The 2 leaders agreed on joint efforts to better fight the coronavirus pandemic. Fernandez called for a more united Latin America to fight the pandemic that has severely struck the region.
Sometimes I think that if we had been closer and more united, surely we could have coped better. Well, that time has passed. Now is the opportunity to come and take advantage of the experience that the pandemic has left us to understand the importance of development and unity among Argentines, Chileans, and also among Latin Americans.
Now, women are defying gender-related social barriers across the world. And in Afghanistan, the country's first female breaker has set her sights on the Paris Olympics in 2024. Let's find out more in this report.
At a gym in downtown Kabul, Maniza Talash and her teammates jump and sway to the beat, working up a sweat breakdancing and doing head spins. When she first joined the breakdancing club about 2.5 months ago, there were no girls there. Now, 5 other girls have followed her lead.
This is a new and different profession, and the club did not have a female member when I first joined. I was very interested in breakdancing, and when I became aware that it has come to Afghanistan and its members are all nice people from my own country, I joined this club to introduce this profession to other people. In general, I want to be different.
The club, founded by a few local breakers a year ago, now has over 30 members. They train 3 days a week to learn the finer points of a dance style that has evolved into a sport, hoping one day to compete in the Olympics. Apart from having to overcome social hurdles, the Lash has to brace for tough physical training, but she is determined.
This is very tough, and you have to have a strong physique to learn and do it. For example, standing on one hand and holding the whole body weight on it is not easy. But nothing is easy. You can learn and achieve the goal.
Breakdancing, an art form which was born on the streets of New York City in the 1970s, was among 4 sports, along with skateboarding, sports climbing, and surfing, that the International Olympics Committee agreed recently to add in the Paris Games in 2024 to attract a younger, more urban audience.
Now in Egypt, you can get your vaccine and eat it too. For an inspiring baker has made a cake resembling a vaccine vial, which she delivered to coronavirus patients at the Cairo hospital. Details in this report.
Egyptian baker Amy Izzat is a woman on a mission. She knows the population is suffering from pandemic fatigue, so she's delivering hope and happiness to patients fighting the coronavirus in the form of cake. The gray and white cake has the words coronavirus vaccine glued on top with edible sugar sheets and fondant. It is meant to give patients a glimmer of hope that the pandemic will soon be over, especially now when the countries around the world have started vaccinating their populations.
I got the idea of making this cake as it's now been a year since the coronavirus pandemic started, and now the vaccine is being distributed around the world. I like to do this cake to give hope to patients fighting the virus, something to make them happy, something as simple as this to give them hope and make them happy. I hope the future will be better.
The baker has boxed and delivered the cake to the May 15 hospital in Cairo's Helvan neighborhood, which is being used as a quarantine hospital. The 3-layer vanilla sponge cake filled with raspberry cream with chocolate ganache coating took 3 days to make and decorate.
This cake took around 3 days for me to make. I baked it, added the filling, decorated it to look like a vial, and then used edible sugar sheets that people can eat for the writing.
Egypt has a record of more than 160,000 COVID-19 cases and nearly 9,000 deaths to date. Health officials say the real number of infections is likely to be much higher because of the low testing rate and exclusion of private testing results from official figures.
Now, with France under COVID-19 restrictions, Paris' hot Cochair week has not been in its usual form. Many labels have turned to online video presentations since runway shows with fashion crowd congregation is not a possibility. Details in this report.
French fashion designer Julien Fournier first learned to wield a pair of scissors, then to design a dress on an iPad. Now the pandemic has forced him to pick up a new skill as a movie director. Paris Haute Couture Week is normally a riot of catwalk shows, usually packed with editors, buyers, and influencers. But not this year. Fournier spent 3 days shooting a 9-minute and 30-second film in his workshop. Pandemic has not just made designers reinvent. Fournier says customers now want less extravagant designs.
Non, il y a toujours des fêtes.
There are still parties, some weddings, but it all becomes more private, more contained with all the social distancing that we know. So these women also want clothes more high quality, more haute couture, so they also reinvent their way to show off. They ask for dresses less shiny, less extravagant, dresses that they can show in a little group.
The French fashion house Chanel chose an intimate family-like atmosphere for its Spring-Summer 2021 show. Models started under flower arches at a socially distanced presentation with a few famous faces. Actresses including Penelope Cruz, Marion Cotillard, and Lily Rose Depp, all Chanel ambassadors, watched from spaced-out chairs as models walked down the steps of Paris's Grand Palace onto the catwalk filled with petals and fairy lights. Floral patterns adorned designer Virginie Vacard creations, embroidered on lace tops or stitched onto dresses. Models also wore floral crowns on their heads. The show closed with the traditional Chanel bride arriving on a horse and dressed in the 1920s style long button satin dress before Vacard waved to the socially distanced audience.
Now, European stocks are trading mixed, echoing an uncertain trend seen in other global markets overnight. Investors are assessing the COVID-19 vaccine distribution and the recent growth projections released by the IMF. The pan-European stock 600, London's FTSE and CAC 40 in Paris gained fractionally. Italy's FTSE, MIB and DAX in Frankfurt both dipped marginally. Earlier, Asian stocks traded mixed. Sales Kospi, Australia's ASX 200 and mainland Chinese stocks shed, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng and Japanese bourses edged up. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.